So I made it up without tripping, which is really good. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Arielle Kaden. I am a senior here at Johns Hopkins, and I'm a writing seminars major and Jewish studies minor. And the project I'm going to be talking to you about today is called Building a Jewish Future, the Resurgence of Jewish Life in Europe post-World War II. And I'll tell you a little bit about this project's origin, so I'm going to go to the next slide. So a little bit about me and about this research is coming into college, I really only thought of Jewish history in Europe as being the story of the Holocaust. That was really kind of the only knowledge that I'd ever sought out to learn about European Jewish history. And I'd never really considered the question, what happened to the Jews who stayed in Europe after the war? Were these communities able to rebuild, and if so, how? So this research really sought to explore that question. And some of the questions that I asked included, how has Jewish life resurged in Europe since the Holocaust? What is contemporary Jewish life like in Europe now? And how do Jewish people view their future in Europe? And I did this by making interview questions. I decided that I was going to travel to Europe and interview as many people who would speak to me. And that's what I did. Okay, so I selected 3 very different cities to conduct my research in. I chose Poland. Well, I really visited Warsaw and Krakow, and then I spent time in Berlin, and lastly, I spent time in Paris. And I was really conducting a cross-city analysis. I wanted to compare how different Jewish communities, what the experience is for a Jewish person living in Krakow compared to a Jewish person living in Paris. Is one life better than another? Is it safer in one city than another? I had a lot of questions, and I kind of wanted to hear this more personal view. I felt that looking at population numbers could only help me so much. I wanted to hear people's personal experiences and stories. So the first country that I visited was Poland, and this was a real misconception that I have, that I think a lot of other people have as well, is that after the Holocaust, Jewish life died in Poland after the Holocaust. My question was, why would a Jewish person ever want to live there? So really, what I learned when I was in Poland is that post-1990, there's been this major resurgence of Jewish life. And how did that happen? So what I came to understand is that after the Holocaust happened, when communism took over Poland, for any Jewish person who wanted to stay in the country, there was a real dilemma because it wasn't really safe to be openly Jewish and living in communist Poland. Religion was really suppressed. So you had a whole generation of people who might have survived the Holocaust not really feeling like it was safe or practical to tell their children and grandchildren that they were Jewish. So when communism fell in the 90s and democracy took over, suddenly you had grandparents able to tell their children and grandchildren, like, by the way, you're Jewish. And it's interesting to see how people ran with it. And really, in the last 25 years, there's been this real resurgence of Jewish life. I really witnessed this by spending a lot of time at the 2 Jewish community centers in Poland, in Warsaw and Krakow, each which have been founded in the past 10 years and have really been epicenters of Jewish life in Poland, and are really doing an amazing job. And one quote that I wanted to share is, almost everyone here decided that they wanted to be Jewish, and that was said to me by the chief rabbi of Poland. And I think one thing to think about Poland is when you meet a Jewish person who lives there, it's an active decision to be Jewish in Poland. So many people had to decide if they wanted to embrace their Jewish roots or not. Like for me, coming from America, where I've always known that I was Jewish, it was just kind of a part of me, that was really shocking to think that Judaism can be something that you just decide. So next I'm going to take you to Berlin. And this city, I really wanted to research Berlin because I was interested how Jewish people could live in a city that was once dominated by the Nazis. It's really Berlin has such a vibrant Jewish past, but it was the capital of Nazi Germany. So it turns out that 45,000 Jewish people currently live in Berlin. And what I didn't know until really getting there was that over 90% of the Jewish population in Germany are immigrants from the former Soviet Union. So a lot of Jews in Germany are actually really Russian, or they have Russian roots. So you really have this interesting identity shift between being a Soviet Jew to now being a German Jew. And the question was, can people make that transition? Can I, this kind of hyphenated identity, can I be Russian, Jewish, German, all at the same time? And so you really see that in Berlin, and even to make it more complex, in Berlin you have 15 to 20,000 Israelis living there. You have this really in the past 10 years, you've had this wave of young Israelis moving to Berlin for all different reasons, emotional and practical. But there's a lot of economic opportunity in Berlin, especially for young artists or entrepreneurs, and Israelis are really taking advantage of this. So between the Russian Jews and the Israeli Jews and the German Jews all living together in Berlin, that makes for a really interesting Jewish community center, right? And that was what I wanted to investigate, and I wanted to hear as many stories as possible. And that's what I did. So lastly, I spent time in Paris last summer. And Paris, one thing to know about it, it's the city outside of Israel and the United States with the largest Jewish population. Around 282,000 Jews live there currently, or in 2014. But it's kind of like a double-edged sword because Paris, of all the cities I visited, also has the most significant amount of anti-Semitism. I could see it just being there. Like, I didn't feel comfortable wearing this Jewish star walking around the streets there. And that rise in anti-Semitism it's spurred out of a lot of different reasons. Partly because of French decolonization after the 60s, you had this whole new waves of immigrants coming from North Africa that came with a much different mindset than native Parisians. So I really think all of Europe, Paris in particular, is kind of going through this identity crisis. It's how do we become a united city that embraces all peoples? And I could see that definitely while I was there, and that really came out in the interviews. A lot of Parisian Jews, their question was, do we belong anymore? I feel so French, but can I live in a city that might not love me back? That's kind of how they felt. And it was very sad, obviously, for me to hear, but it's the truth, and this is the message I really want to discuss. So as I kind of brought up earlier, some of my conclusions is this whole idea of an identity crisis. Europe is now becoming a much more globalized continent. You have people from all over the world now living in Europe, and I think the real question for the future is how can we make it feasible that people of different religions and cultures and origins can all live together and live peacefully. And that's a question that I think will surge into the future, but I'm an optimist. I think I get that from my mom. And I think we'll be able to figure it out. But I do think that, I don't have this up here, but I do think that dialogue is extremely important. And the only way people are going to accept each other is if they speak to each other. And that's what I'm advocating for. So here's the next slide. So kind of in summary, one thing I kind of took from traveling the world and hearing all of these different stories is the importance of unity. So while I really, I did a cross-city analysis, I compared different communities, one thing that stood out to me is this responsibility that we have for each other. Like, even though I'm American, I feel this responsibility for Jewish people in Paris, this idea of a world community. Especially, in such a globalized world, we need to look out for each other, and not just Jews looking out for Jews, but all people looking out for each other. So that's kind of what I took from this. And briefly, what's next for me? I'm currently writing a memoir about my research experience. I kept a blog called Saving the Shtetlach that I started 3 years ago, and I never kind of expected to turn it into a memoir, but someone suggested it, and I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. And so I'm currently writing that right now, and next year I will be living in Berlin, Germany. I feel really privileged. I'm going to be continuing my research of Berlin's Jewish community as a Fulbright scholar in their Young American Journalism program. So I'll be a journalist, yay. And I just want to thank, there's so many people to thank, like infinite people, but particularly I'd like to thank Amy Cox and Stephen David of the Woodrow Wilson program just for their infinite kindness and support. My mentor, Dr. Eric Sundquist, the best mentor by far I could have asked for, and he has been supportive since the beginning, and I feel really in debt to him. I wouldn't have been able to do this project without my mentor. And I'd like to thank the Wilson program. I think it's so cool when you go to a school that believes in your dreams as much as you do, and I think the Wilson program really supports that, and really not only like financially investing in their students, but giving them the community of Wilson Fellows that they need to inspire them. All the Wilsons are amazing and fully inspired. And lastly, I'd like to thank my family. You guys know how I feel about you. Just kidding. No, they traveled here from New Jersey to come see me today, so infinite love. And thank you.